Welcome to a new episode of Film Seizure at the Movies. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the Film Seizure podcast that you can listen to with my cohorts, Jason Oliver and Chuck Moore, and also my solo show, Monster Mondays. You can catch both of those shows at filmseizure.com. We kick off this triple feature with what should likely prove to be one of the bigger moneymakers of the entire year, the long-awaited sequel Top Gun Maverick. In this movie, Tom Cruise returns to play Pete Maverick Mitchell, and he's kind of up to his old tricks. At the end of the classic 1986 film, he did not win the Top Gun honor, but he did graduate second, and he did make lifelong friends with his nemesis from that movie, Iceman, played by Val Kilmer, and did apply to be a teacher at the Top Gun facility in Fightertown, USA. However, we learned that after only a few short weeks as an instructor, he washed out and went back to running missions as he always wanted. He spent time during doing tours in both of the Iraq wars and in Afghanistan, but let's face it, he's Tom Cruise, and he's still playing Maverick with that boyish grin and devilish demeanor that he played the part with over 35 years ago. He's been testing aircraft and pushing them to their limits, but after pissing off one admiral, played by Ed Harris, his goose, no pun intended, is saved by Iceman, as his old rival and friend is an admiral who can pull some favors. He's recalled to Top Gun to train a new crop of top pilots and fighters to attack an underground enemy uranium storage facility that is about to create weapons-grade plutonium and create havoc in the balance of world power. His students are 12 of the top graduates to ever go through the training, and he's got the technically skilled Phoenix, played by Monica Barbaro, the incredibly full of himself and self-centered Hangman, played by Glenn Powell, and the son of his former co-pilot from the original film, Rooster, played by Miles Teller. While the collected group of expert pilots cause enough pain and suffering for each other as they constantly take the piss out of each other all day and all night, personal beef between Rooster and Maverick takes center stage in this movie, and that's really where the heart of this movie lies. It's not Cruise flashing his pearly white smile and being boyishly sexy like you might have seen in his early days as a rising star. He's actually playing an older character, and you feel his years of never settling down or doing things his way and not necessarily wanting to follow orders. And all of this stuff kind of starts to weigh on him. Yes, there are plenty of great scenes of Tom Cruise having to face off against top brass characters like Admiral Cyclone Simpson, played by John Hamm. There are fantastic lines that really got a good chuckle out of me between those two characters. There is this fantastic sequence in which Maverick is teaching dogfighting with the team that are both funny and exciting. The early parts of the movie where Maverick is testing this hypersonic jet is great. It's like this movie was made only a few years after the original Top Gun. These are the things you buy the tickets for and go to the theater to see from a movie with Top Gun in the title. But that's not really where the movie excels. The great scenes in this movie are the ones in which you have to see Tom Cruise act, and he really is kind of acting his ass off in this movie. He's tying together his brash earlier part of his career with his now elder statesman era, and it's working a lot, especially in this movie. He's tortured by some of the things you saw in the original Top Gun. He's haunted by the loss of Goose, his co-pilot. He's always running away from doing what would be the right thing as a career naval pilot. In fact, it's mentioned several times that he's never progressed beyond the rank of captain because he's more or less defective as a pilot. He has these wonderfully flirtatious scenes with Jennifer Connelly playing an old flame that are they're just simply pleasant scenes. You don't have to see them rolling around in bed to know that you want them to roll around in bed. These are two very good-looking, mature actors doing good things together. Cruise's scenes with his buddy Hondo in this movie, who works with him wherever he goes, are just really nice scenes. All those things are wonderful, but there are two relationships that really shine in this movie. And the first is the obvious one with Rooster. We learn more about some of the things that happened to little Bradley Bradshaw after Anthony Edwards' Goose died in the original movie and the years after. Rooster decides to go into the Navy and became a pilot like his dad and so on, and how Maverick handled that. Maverick's handling of the events of the first movie lightly touches upon PTSD, but the movie is pretty smart to sidestep that complicated issue while still letting us know that Maverick has struggles. The relationship between Maverick and Rooster and how it connects to Goose from the original Top Gun is where this movie really builds tension. I would even go so far as to say that the second film is far more exciting and thrilling in some parts than the original. There were legitimately moments in which I thought people were not going to survive this movie. Not like the Goose stuff in the original, but in the climax of this movie, I wasn't so sure that everyone was going to be safe to survive. And at the very least, if one of the main characters died, it would not have been a cheap twist. Finally, there's, here's kind of a small spoiler that really isn't much of a spoiler. There's a wonderful scene with Tom Cruise and Val Kilmer. Of course, we know that Val Kilmer had issues, and his health issues make him so that he can barely speak. But there's real power between these two actors where you can honestly feel well-earned drama. And Tom Cruise even tears up in the scene as he's talking to Kilmer. Kilmer honestly acts like an admiral without hardly saying anything. It's a fantastic moment right in the middle of this movie that is so heartfelt, and it's one of the great scenes for these types of movies. And yeah, in the end, sure, Top Gun is playing our hearts, our nostalgia, and our dumb 80s brains like a 12-string guitar. It's manipulative by doing what a lot of other movies often fail to do, no matter how much we claim we want it and how much the filmmakers say that they are doing. It's giving us exactly what we want. It starts with Danger Zone by Kenny Loggins blaring over the speakers while we watch guys on an aircraft carrier doing things and giving thumbs ups and high fives and all that good stuff that make you feel like little kids again, while the fighter jets go fly and do the pew-pew against the enemies of the God-blessed US of A. But yeah, it's silly, but damn it works in this instance. If you like Top Gun 35 years ago, you're really going to like Maverick a lot today, I think. Okay, so now let's talk about the second movie that we're going to talk about here, and that's the big screen version of Lauren Bouchard's Bob's Burgers. Now, Bob's Burgers started back in early 2011 on Fox as part of their Sunday lineup of shows that joined The Simpsons, Family Guy, and King of the Hill. Just as those three shows had proven to be quite successful and found the niche that led to Family Guy and King of the Hill getting replays aired on Adult Swim and other Turner stations like TBS and TNT. Interestingly, even though the first episode was the highest rated new series premiere of the 2010-2011 season across all networks, it had a little bit of a rocky start. Critics didn't really love the show, but it did just enough to capture fans of quirky stuff. And I was not originally one of those fans. Yeah, I love quirky animated shows. I love the programming on Adult Swim, particularly in the earlier years. I love shows like The Simpsons, Family Guy, The Cleveland Show, American Dad, and King of the Hill for what each one of those shows did with their specific styles and characters. Both of those things combined should have been a slam dunk for me with Bob's Burgers. Lauren Bouchard co-created Home Movies, which was one of those early Adult Swim shows that originally got replay there and then revived there. He and Brendan Small had a sense of humor that was right up my alley. When I first watched Bob's Burgers, I was in the camp of not being overly impressed with it. However, I did boomerang back around to it somewhere with the 4th or 5th season of the series, as they did get replayed on Adult Swim. That allowed me to back up and check out the previous episodes, and it finally hooked me. That said, it is still a very quirky show and difficult to pin who would or would not possibly like it. As much as Bob's Burgers relies on pop culture reference for jokes and puns, it's not like Family Guy, where it will stop cold to tell you that joke for a different laugh on top of the pop culture reference. It's not a family like The Simpsons. There's much more realistic dynamic while still playing to silly situations in Bob's Burgers. I guess you could say to someone, hey, did you like Home Movies? Then you'll probably like Bob's Burgers. But then Home Movies is so obscure that you'll likely have a hard time finding someone to ask that to, and that they would know what you're talking about. You also have to contend with the musical numbers that the show often does too. Again, comparing to Simpsons and Family Guys that have both dabbled with musical numbers and so forth, it's nothing like what you'd expect from a Fox animation show that will either pull someone in further or push them so far out that they may never come back. In time, though, I gave it the shot it deserved, and I'm very glad that I did. Now, as for the movie, it seems like this movie has been in development from the very start. At least from the time that I started watching the show, it's been something that people would say, there's a movie of that being planned, and so on. And why the hell not? The Simpsons movie is so great because it really seemed to use the characters so well and put them in a realistic situation that would work really well for how that series is designed and how those characters are built. So it's only natural for Fox to see Bob's Burgers as a spiritual successor in that regard. Of course, this movie is a musical comedy. If the show uses music often, you knew they would do the same here. And it starts with a fantastic song about how the summer is going to be great, and a looming worry that the parents, Linda and Bob Belcher, have to deal with is just going to work out just fine. That then transitions to the kids and how they plan to finish the school year, with Tina wanting it to make official with her crush Jimmy Jr. for a summer romance, Jean wanting to finally make waves with music, and Louise revealing that she has some buried doubt that she represses as much as possible. It gives not just a thesis statement for what each member of the family plans to do to make this the best summer yet, but it also kicks off the whole movie with a big, vibrant song and dance number. You get to see right out of the gate that the animation is upgraded for the big screen. I know The Simpsons got a boost after their movie, and I wonder if Bob's Burgers will too, in terms of how it looks, in terms of like shading and coloring on the TV series. But the movement of the characters doing their dances is also so smooth and fluid that it actually looks kind of real, and it's a really great looking movie. And speaking of the musical numbers, the music, as is always the case with Bob's Burgers, is fun and has a lot of lines and moments that you can kind of chuckle along with the audience. I really would not be surprised if Disney will not just push for the Best Animated Feature Oscar nomination for this, but for a Best Original Song, especially for the lead-off song, Sunny Side Up Summer. The story concerns Bob and Linda needing to figure out how to make a small business loan payment that is late and they can't get an extension for. In the course of them trying to figure this all out, a burst water main under the street creates a sinkhole right in front of their restaurant that makes it impossible for people to come in so that they can sell the burgers to make the payment. In the sinkhole is the skeleton of someone murdered 6 years prior, and it's up to the Belchers to 1, figure out how to sell burgers to make their loan payment, and 2, figure out what this murder mystery is so that they can 3, save the person who is originally arrested for it, because that person might be able to help them and make sure that they can actually make the first thing they need to figure out, the whole idea of making their loan payment. So you got that? Good. Now, the one thing I really like about this movie is that it really does give pretty much all the main characters something to do. There are a few characters that I'm surprised are missing, and there are a couple that are kind of diminished, but for each of the Belchers and their regular customer, Teddy, and the family that owns the properties that Bob's Burgers is on and the nearby Wonder Wharf amusement park, they all have something to do, and it works very well with those characters. And as I said, the animation looks great and the songs are catchy and a lot of fun. Now, if I did have a small issue, it's that the movie feels a tad too long. It comes in at about 100 minutes of story time. That's basically 4.5 episodes, and that makes for a decent little story arc, but there are some points that just kind of feel a little too long. The reason for that is that I liked the song so much and that they were so catchy and really moved the plot along that when there were only like 4 songs, you were basically getting anxious to get to the next song, causing the plot to sag a bit in between. Still, I think this is a very well-made movie that used these characters very well, and if they opt to make another movie, I'll be happy to see it. But like The Simpsons, again comparing it to their closest relative in style, I'm not sure they need to move out of the episodic TV format. So we wrap up things for this episode with our third movie that we'll talk about here, and the new film by writer and director Alex Garland. And he's been on a bit of a critical streak over the last 10 years or so with his science fiction films Dread, Ex Machina, and Annihilation. This time he goes a little smaller and a lot more into the realm of folk horror with Men. Men is about a woman named Harper Marlowe, played by Jessie Buckley, who has become recently widowed after her psychologically, emotionally, and physically abusive husband falls to his death after she makes the decision to leave him. Whether or not it was an accident caused by rain-soaked footing, or if it was the suicide he threatened to commit if she left him as a final act of cruelty on her, is pretty unclear, and they never actually tried to settle on that. So she's gone to a country estate in England to get away and heal. However, she begins being haunted by several different men in this small village, all played by Rory Kinnear, who's been in several of the James Bond movies lately. Now, at first, the landlord who owns the estate that she is staying in just seems very British and a little odd, but somewhat well-meaning. However, with each subsequent man she encounters, it's very clear that they go from scary to legitimately childish to gaslighting to uncaring to downright threatening, each one possessing a seemingly different perspective that would often turn its attention or ire toward women who interact with them. It's going to be difficult to get too much into any kind of detail because this movie definitely has some surprises, but I will say it's probably not exactly for the faint of heart either. There are incredibly dour and tough scenes, particularly as Buckley's Harper relives her past trauma with her dead husband and that morning that he died. It's not an easy watch. It's also got some shockingly traumatic gore that I was not quite expecting, and I'm pretty sure it's not something the rest of the audience expected either. And speaking of the audience, I might recommend that you not see this movie at your regular local multiplex. Between the obvious subject matter that's playing out, the multiple instances of full frontal male nudity, and the gore toward the end, it's really not something you want to see with people who aren't particularly mature enough for the subject matter at hand. And it's not an in-your-face horror movie either. This is not a jump scare movie. I will also say it is not really a slow burn either. The movie keeps pressure on the viewer and literally keeps you on edge from very early on to the very end. Like I said, there are no jump scares in this, which really basically gives me the type of horror that I always want. This is photographed very lusciously with a lot of greens in this small countryside town and the surrounding woods. But when things begin to start to build in tension, I am now starting to look at the background. I want to look around trees and through windows to see who might be lurking about. And it's the kind of uneasy expectation of something hiding just out of plain sight that starts to really make my skin crawl, and it's what I want more horror to do. Now, this movie looks great, and it's got this right kind of creepy crawly feeling of knowing something is out there, but not really falling into the usual tricks and tropes modern horror gets trapped in. all of that was already getting high marks for me. The performances are great too. As much as Jessie Buckley is having to, to carry in this movie, as much as she has to kind of shoulder here, especially emotionally, I especially want to give a big old thumbs up to Rory Kinnear for playing several different types of people in one overarching performance. It's a definite treat to see what the next character was going to be. The thematic side of the movie will hit different depending on who you are and what your experiences are in the world. It's a fascinating animal in that way. I was lucky enough to see it with a good friend who could help me find the meaning in the stuff that was just out of reach of complete comprehension for me. And I could find the obvious stuff, maybe the stuff that guys are supposed to find pretty easily. I compared each of the Rory Kinnear characters being like a comment section on a woman's personal blog. You have some who will try to logically pin blame for a traumatic experience, usually back at the person feeling the trauma. You have the immature who just lashes out against the icky girl with her dumb feelings and opinions. You have the societal representative who tries to use quick and easy answers to justify the authorities from having to get involved. And then you have characters like a person that kind of lures you in as somebody who will listen to you and take everything into consideration. And then just when you realize this is somebody to trust, he says and does something that is that tarnishes that trust that you've given him. And then lastly, you have the white knight type of person who wants to rush in and be the protector or the one who fixes everything. And I could spot significant themes of birth and rebirth and cycles of how these types of people and reactions to certain sectors of society get perpetrated and so on. However, I can't say I ever had to try to tell my side of the story of a traumatic experience and then have a half a dozen people tell me what their perspective of my experience is. So that's how my, good friend was able to help me connect that side of the story. She experienced the movie from a very different physical side of the fence. She clammed up. I could see her shifting in her seat and recoiling from events in the movie differently than I did. I could look at something and think, yeah, that's not good. And she would be connected to how she felt walking down the street at night or something like that. And that's, really not as bad as it gets. There were just simply lines of dialogue that will be very deep cutting, depending on the viewer's experience with various situations. Being able to talk about that after the movie and getting a better understanding of what was just out of reach for me makes this a very interesting movie. What you have is one movie that presents itself in different ways based on the viewer. This is not a movie that is meant to give every single viewer the same experience. It's not something that can possibly please everyone in the same way as, say, Top Gun Maverick or the Bob's Burgers movies could. For that reason, I'm not surprised that this movie has a generally favorable critic rating on Rotten Tomatoes and a pretty low audience score. It's either going to draw you in and possibly even traumatize you in some ways, or it's going to repel you. There was a couple in our showing that walked out with about 15 minutes left to go in the movie. So in the end, I would like to see Men again, just to see what more I could spot in the movie and that I might have missed the first time around. It's an endlessly interesting movie. Maybe not one of the tippy-top best of the year for me, but a really interesting one that I'm glad I saw and could see it with someone who could help connect some dots that my limited experience in feeling some of the things that Harper does in the movie just simply couldn't. And I also can't truly recommend this to a wide audience. For a few of my friends, absolutely. My Film Seizure cohorts, Jason and Chuck, oh, absolutely. The person taking my order at Burger King, oh, for sure. I could not just open up and say, hey, you should go see this movie called Men. It's great. So to recap, I strongly recommend Top Gun Maverick to people who appreciate those older style action movies. For the Bob's Burgers movies, if you're a fan of the show, you're already probably planning to see this. Lastly, for Men, despite me finding it a fascinating film, I will mildly recommend it to those who want a little bit of a challenge, who won't be scared off by some of the upfront themes. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram so you can be made aware of new episodes of our various shows as they drop. You can also follow us at podcast providers like SoundCloud, Google Podcast, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, and Audible. You can also listen to the show on YouTube by subscribing to us there. I'll be back next week with a trio of horrors, The Seed, Watcher, and Crimes of the Future. So until then, don't forget to save me the aisle seat.